Cool. Welcome, everyone. This is the July edition of the DataHub community meeting. We have a packed agenda as usual. Let's see, who do we have? First, I'll do the usual few project updates, cover everything we've done in July and the upcoming release highlights. And then we will have 3 sessions. The first one on data observability, phase 1. The Acryl Data team will discuss what they've done and what's coming. The second piece is Melinda at New York Times, who will describe what she's doing with user surveys in DataHub. And then finally, we will talk about work done by Kevin on integrating SageMaker with DataHub for supporting models and feature observability. And then we'll go into Q&A and closing. So let's get started. Quick updates on the community. A lot of people don't know this, so I'm just putting it out there. We put out updates over Medium. We have a project newsletter that we typically have like a monthly cadence. So please follow it and share it. That's the best way to kind of have a long form content for improvements and changes that are happening in the project. Also, if you want to write for the DataHub project, definitely let us know. We're always looking for high quality content. So happy to guide folks in writing their first DataHub blog post. The second thing is, again, you probably know this, but we have a YouTube channel. We take all the community town halls, create videos for them and share them out. If there are other talks that you're doing at other conferences or want to just record a quick demo for how you are setting up DataHub, let us know and we will be happy to put it up on the channel as well. So follow these 2 channels, long form content, video content, and create. All right, so project updates. The 0.8.7 release is coming. We like to not release releases just before the weekend. So we'll share what's coming, we'll share the stats, and then we'll probably cut the release right after the weekend. I took a quick look at the commits that have happened so far since the last town hall. 130 plus, so we're keeping up with our 130 plus rate of commits. Committers or contributions, 16 from 9 different companies and 6 new contributors, which is great. Biggest highlights in the last month, dataset stats, aka profiles, data observability phase 1, as we're calling it, is going to be part of this release. And the SageMaker integration for models and features. Both of these are things we're talking about today, so I won't take up time. And then there are a few other highlights in 3 tracks as usual. First, product improvements. Second, integrations. And third, some developer experience improvements. So let's get into it. But before that, some quick call outs. We have kind of an interesting first commit from Wei at LinkedIn. Remember last time we discussed deprecating the Ember code base and officially announcing that we're all on React moving forward. So Wei recently sent over his first commit, and it's amazing to see when a lot of files get deleted, because that's the best way to keep code clean. So thanks, Wei, for doing that. And we're looking forward to making the React app amazing with all of you. Few other people who've actually been doing amazing work. Asim Bansal, you might have seen him on Slack. He's really giving the DataHub product a run through the ringer, finding so many interesting issues. So thanks for doing that and giving us great suggestions. Also sending PRs over GitHub to improve the product. That's the best kind of contribution. So thank you for doing that. James Lamb, he recently joined and Spot Hero, I think, and then started diving into Looker right away and started improving the code as well. So thank you for doing that. And then there are some veterans like Remy and Frederick who are continuing to help and coach newcomers, both on Slack as well as on GitHub. So thanks for doing that. Some new collabs are coming up. So Tawfiq Ibrahim and Chris Colson are starting to collab on a Redash integration, which is amazing to watch. So contact them if you want. I know Redash was a commonly requested integration, so definitely reach out to them if you want to make sure that it's going to work for your environment. We had a contribution for adding functional testing to the front end, which was great. We had always wanted to add these kind of tests, didn't get enough time, and so it was great to collaborate with Van54, I think it's Van Chiu from Australia, who added functional testing to the front end. I think we're using Cypress for that, right, Gabe?
Yep, yeah, we really appreciate that PR a lot. It's super helpful and great to have people contribute tests.
Cool. And then, of course, last but not the least, Saxo Bank team continues to improve the business glossary feature, and so we're really like the collaboration there. Thanks for sending all those PRs over and the mocks. Very soon you'll start seeing some of these features show up in the main app as well. And for someone that I forgot to call out, really sorry. Love all of the amazing engagement on Slack, both in terms of feedback as well as helping each other out. Let's continue to keep that going. All right, a couple of quick call outs on the product improvements track. We've got the business glossary feature that's been incubating for a while. So there have been some improvements over the past month. It's still not GA yet. There's still a few things that we're collaborating with the Saxo Bank team on. So it'll probably be a full reveal kind of in the next town hall, most likely, in terms of what it does. Similar story with schema history. There's a few features in there for visualizing schema history, comparing multiple versions and things like that. We've already got some feedback about things that are nice about this and things that are not so great and need improvement. So we're actually actively working on those improvements. So hopefully in the next town hall, we get to do a deeper dive into schema history and making it amazing from a UX perspective. So these are two features that had improvements in the past month. All right, on the integration side, it was kind of interesting as I looked at all of the different improvements that came in. It's pretty much across the board, every single integration got better, which is great because that means none of these connectors are stagnating and not getting used. So we've actually had tons of improvements, a lot of improvements on the DBT and Looker integrations in particular. But also small improvements all over the stack. Finally, on the developer track, already talked about Cypress for the functional testing of the UI. There have been some improvements in just the ergonomics of integration, ingestion, working with transformers. We've done some work on image hardening for Docker. We now have a recipe for how to restore indexes. It's not a turnkey recipe, but at least it tells you how to get it done, especially if you're running on AWS and you've got an RDS backup, how you can restore your Elasticsearch indexes and your Neo4j indexes from those backups. And there is one more thing that Gabe was dying to share with you all. So I'll let him go for it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very excited to talk about this. So one thing that we're including in the new release is the ability to roll back ingestion runs that you've made to DataHub. So in the case that maybe you've ingested some sample data that you want to get rid of, maybe you ingested some data that you don't want to expose to users, or maybe you overwrote some good metadata. In these cases, you might want to roll back an ingestion run and either delete some updates that you made or delete entities entirely. So we've added some CLI commands to help make this a little bit easier for you. And I can just give a brief demo of that now so you can see what it's like to roll back ingestion runs.
All right, let's do that.
So in this demo, we're going to do some live deleting of data, and hopefully I don't delete my whole computer. So looking at my DataHub here, you can see that I've ingested a very bad field during a ingestion run, and I'm gonna want to get rid of this. So now the flow is I can go to my command line, and I can say DataHub run ls. So this command will go to DataHub and see what recent runs have been made. Each time we do ingestion, we'll create a unique run ID and attach that to all the metadata we ingested. So I can see here are the recent runs that I've done and a little profile about them. So I know that the most recent run I did was good. And I think that the bad data got in a small run where I was just trying to patch a little bit of metadata. But to make sure, I can go run DataHub run show, and this will provide a more detailed look at this individual run. So I can see how many aspects were updated, and also a sample of the metadata that was updated in that run. In this case, I can see that the schema metadata of this logging events entity was updated. So I can be confident now, okay, this is the run that brought that bad data in. In that case, I can then say DataHub run rollback, enter that run ID, and it will go through and revert those changes. So we reverted the schema metadata on the logging events entity. And when I go back to my DataHub and refresh the page, I will see the schema metadata that I had ingested before that now shows up and is now indexed, and I get my good data back. If I were to revert the run that created this entity, the entity would be then deleted entirely. I wouldn't be able to search for it anymore. And as far as DataHub is concerned, the entity would never have existed. So now if you make mistakes, no problem. Just go to this DataHub run command line. You can find your runs and you can delete them very easily.
That is awesome. Honestly, I can't count the number of times I've ingested bad metadata and then had to nuke everything to start back again.
In an ideal world, no one would need to do this, but accidents happen, and we're here to help. So back to you, Shirshanka.
Awesome. Perfect. And I need to go back to my. There we are, back on the screen, right? So maybe a quick detail on exactly how this works. These obviously work for batch ingestions because a batch ingestion produces a run ID that is attached to everything that was ingested in that one run. This is now produced, the run ID now gets attached to every event that gets produced and is indexed in Elasticsearch for these previews. And as Gabe described, the rollbacks will kind of revert changes on a per aspect level. Awesome. So now let's get into the first talk of the session, which is data observability phase 1. And we have the team here. But before we get started, I just wanted to ask people who was here in February. Can we get some hands raised just to see how many people attended the February town hall who are still here? Okay, we have a few. Hey, John. Okay, great. So we have a few, but a lot of you are new. So quick reminder of what happened. In February, we actually did a live survey and shared out a few mocks about where we thought DataHub could go in terms of an observability perspective on top of the metadata. And we had come up with some mocks and we shared it out with the community and we asked for feedback. And we even shared out the results of the survey. A lot of people were data platform leads, some PMs, and a lot of data engineers as expected. And a lot of these pain points were around understanding how the data looks like, understanding its freshness, understanding data quality checks, things like that. We also got a lot of feedback that people couldn't wait for it. They wanted to have it and they wanted to work with us in storyboarding these use cases and give us feedback. And that was, I think, February. March happened, April happened, May happened, and we were busy doing a lot of other work, like building out the foundations for no-code metadata and delivering a bunch of other features. But we always wanted to get back to actually building the observability use cases on top of this metadata graph. And with that, I want to hand it over to John to share what we've been up to and what we've done.
Thank you, Shirshanka. I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind. Okay, can everyone see my DataHub?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, this demo is going to be broken up into, actually this presentation will be broken up into a couple parts. The first one will be kind of the product side, and then we'll go into the engineering design portion that Dexter will talk about. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to get started using this feature. And Harshal will lead that section. So we kind of think of observability and this set of features in two buckets. We think of sort of the proactive and the reactive bucket, sort of the explorer versus operator use cases. And I'm going to talk through a couple different use cases using this new feature set we've built out to highlight some of the things we've done. So the first is the operator perspective. So imagine I own an Airflow pipeline that is maybe computing some statistics. I work at the NIH, so I have a lot of cancer data. So I have something called compute larynx carcinoma cases. So this is like a job that runs periodically every month and computes some information about carcinoma frequency by location, by geography. And this is something I own. Recently, I've found that this job has been failing. And it's kind of interesting because I haven't changed any of the code. I haven't actually changed any of the configurations about the job. So I'm going to walk through how I could go about debugging this problem using DataHub's UI. The first thing is, I'll go and actually look at the task that's causing trouble. And then maybe I'll look at the lineage view to understand kind of where this data is coming from or what my inputs are. And I could see that there's this upstream from Redshift called larynx carcinoma, data 2020. So I can go over there. And what we've built is sort of a new tab on the dataset profile, which is called stats. And so what I can do is I can scroll down to stats to see sort of a latest picture of the data set. So I can see that it has at a table level, 3,742 rows, has 4 columns, and then it has some stats about each column. So we have, the min, the max, if it applies. We have the null count, the null percentage, the distinct count in the column, the distinct percentage. So IDs, obviously 100%. And then we have some sample values that we can show. And this is great and all, but it doesn't really tell me anything about the last few days when my Airflow job has been running. Like I can't see, is this healthy? Is this not healthy? And so really what you need to make that determination is you need a picture of the data set's history, right? You want to see how this data set evolves over time, over its life cycle. And so what we added is what I think is a really powerful tab, which is called historical. And basically what this shows you is the profiling history for this data set. So I'll start with the top here, where we can look at actual profiling runs. So what this is snapshot, point in time snapshots of information about the data set. And so immediately looking at, just 2 days ago, the row count has a dramatic drop from 3742 to 51. And what I can do is actually pull up that profile, right? So I can go back in time and sort of time travel and see profiling runs from history. So let's say the last 3 months I want to look at. Maybe I want to look at something from June that may have happened. There's an incident. And this is also great, but like I have to dig through this, right? So this is one view. I have to kind of dig through this. Like it would be nice to have kind of at a glance understanding of the data set's health. And so for that, you can kind of scroll down and you can see two sections. So the first is sort of historical table stats, where I'm showing how the row count has actually evolved over time on this data set. So you can see things look pretty good until just 2 days ago, where we had a massive drop. So something's up with this data set. I should probably go talk to the maintainer, owner of this data set to understand what's happening. Column count generally looks pretty good. We had a little anomaly here, but pretty steady at 4. This is probably just some blip, right? And if I want to dig down even further to understand how individual columns have changed over time or been impacted by incidents, I can scroll down to this historical column stats section. And what I see there is statistics like the null count over time for a particular column, in this case, the ID column, the null percentage, the distinct count, and the distinct percentage over time. I can also go ahead and flip it to some other columns and see how these have been acting in the last month, 3 months in this case. So you can see this, this patient age had some weird things going on with the null percentage that corresponded to that time when we were in the 51 row range. So there's a couple things going wrong, you can clearly see here. And then maybe I'm looking at the gender, and the gender percentage actually had an anomaly in mid-July, but seems to have been resolved. So this is kind of the operator use case where I'm able to sort of use this historical context to debug downstream issues in consumers reactively. Now, the second use case, which I'll use the same data set to illustrate, is sort of the explorer case, where I'm coming in with the goal of building a new data pipeline. Perhaps I want to build a view on top of this data that breaks down carcinoma cases by, let's say, age. I can come in here and I can at a glance understand whether this is a reliable data set to build on top of, right? So maybe I see that in the last 2 days, holy cow, like this, the row count has just been moving so much. So maybe I shouldn't build something on top of this data set. Maybe this isn't providing that stable foundation that I need. And maybe I'm able to go back and see that, you know, even though in the past week things have been a little bit rough, generally this data set has actually looked pretty good. So maybe it is a strong foundation. So I can begin to ask these more nuanced questions about the data set now that I have this context at my disposal. So that's pretty much the demo. We're still very much taking feedback and iterating on the actual UI and layout. So in particular, we're thinking about whether we should kind of highlight the historical metadata at the forefront or the latest snapshot. Also thinking about how we should mix these insights in and perhaps show a kind of a combined view at a glance that shows both the summary today as well as the historical summary, maybe as the top level section here. So really interested to get feedback from the community about this. Please let me know, drop in the comments or just ping me on Slack, John Joyce. And if you have any product feedback, any ways that this could actually be made more useful for your organization. As you can see down here, we do collect quite a few stats from our profiles. We actually collect stats that aren't even shown here and aren't even displayed yet, which we plan to display, such as column value distributions, standard deviations, and a few other miscellaneous statistics, which I'm sure Harshal will talk a little bit more about. So that's it for the product demo. I will hand it off to my colleague Dexter to take you on a tour of the engineering design.
Awesome. Let me go back to sharing. This was really cool. It's great to see those mocks finally come to life. And next thing I want to ask is for Harshal to talk about the ingestion pathway.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me share the slide.
Share the slide. Yeah.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah, perfect. So the way we built this on the ingestion side is we actually built on top of an existing data quality tool called Great Expectations. This is a tool that a lot of people in our community actually already use, and it has support for in addition to the data quality rules called expectations, you can also do profiling, and that's the thing that we've built on top of. We also support things like limit and offset and those sorts of parameters, so you can help control the amount of data that you actually profile and hence control cloud costs. And this actually works with all of our SQL-based sources. So BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift, MySQL, Postgres, like any of those and many more. You can basically just set profiling enabled to true, as you can see on the right. And then we have a similar regex pattern that you can use to decide which data sets or which tables you actually want to profile. So if there's some random testing data set that you've built, you probably don't need to profile that, and so you can skip that when running profiling. And then as you see on the bottom, when you run ingestion, it will just automatically profile the tables that you've got there if you have it enabled. and it will push all of that over to the back end of DataHub. So we can collect a bunch of information, as you saw on the product side. We also have a couple more things in the pipeline, things like, histograms, or for columns with like low cardinality, we can do, frequency tables of all of the distinct values. A couple other things are coming on the data richness side of things as well. So stay tuned for that. With that, I'll hand it over to Dexter to talk about the backend.
Cool. Awesome. All right, so we've been actually been adding quite a few time-based data to our system, starting with product analytics and then usage stats in the last town hall. In this one, since it's the third time, we wanted to actually think about how to store this in a DataHub way. So the first thing we thought about is, can we just ingest it as a form of an aspect into DataHub? So you can see the usual kind of path that an ingest takes. So first an aspect is ingested, and then we check with MySQL whether there's an update and update MySQL. And if there's a change, emit MAE, and then finally update search indices. And when we tried to fit in this new kind of data into the system, we realized there's some issues, specifically on the MySQL side. So time-based retention is really hard to set up in MySQL. Range queries aggregations are much less efficient, and it's not optimized for high write throughput. So while preserving this whole system, we moved on to the next slide, where we checked that an aspect is a type time series. So an aspect that has time series includes a time series aspect base, which basically just includes one field called timestamp milliseconds. So once the timestamp is there, we assume this aspect is time series, and we skip writing to local DB and directly emit MAEs, and this will actually be stored in the search index instead. So in the search index, we'll have just rows and rows of events that have been ingested. And based on that, we do easy retention setup because now we have the timestamp field, and Elasticsearch provides ways to create new indexes per day and retire indexes after a certain date. And we also allow fast range queries and aggregation queries to get most out of the statistics that you have just ingested. So this allows us to avoid any bottlenecks in log-oriented data where we have very high throughput ingest coming in, and we don't want to wait on MySQL to write it to their DB.
So for
Awesome.
people who are familiar with no-code, this is essentially extending the no-code series of annotations to add the concept of a temporal or a time series aspect. So now you can start emitting event-oriented aspects that are attached to your entities, but never need to be really looked up kind of in a point lookup way. Another thing to point out is the search index. In this case, we decided to use Elasticsearch, but you could actually technically use any analytics index to power this thing, like Druid or Pinot or ClickHouse, or there's so many different OLAP engines out there. All right.
Awesome. So moving to how we get these aspects back. So we first started with a very simple approach where we just get all aspects. So before we had these concepts of versions, but now we don't. So what we do is we introduce this concept of filters. So say we get all the values of the same aspect according to certain filter. So in this case, a filter might be equals, like the earn equals a certain earn. So for example, earn equals dataset one's earn. Or you can put a time range filter, like I want all profiles that came in the last 7 days. Now this allows us to deal with very complex data types because we don't have to do any aggregations, which is currently powering the demo that John just showed. So basically histograms or field values are all just simple aspects that get stored inside the index and we just retrieve them. Now the front end is responsible for doing something with the retrieved aspect and showing charts or showing tables. The second method is a work in progress, but we will release it as part of next release, not this release, but the next release. We want to create like a SQL-like API to access aggregated values. So there are statistics that are not like profiles, where it's not snapshots, for example, usage stats. So we constantly get ingestion of query counts. And for that to have meaning, we need to be able to aggregate across certain buckets. So we wanted to create a SQL-like API where given metrics, filters, and group bys, return a generic table of metrics. For example, like get query counts for a data set in the last month on a weekly basis. So any kind of these queries will be supported through this new API. And we plan to move our existing DataHub usage and dataset usage statistics to this framework once implemented. Awesome. So this is not the end. This is, again, just phase one. So we have a long way to go. So first, on the platform side, short term, we're going to merge this in your initial PR for adding time series aspect, add support for aggregations as well as moving. But more so, we want to connect more operational metadata streams, not just profiles from great applications, to DataHub. And we have a lot more features that we're waiting to build. Continue building out the observability roadmap. And please give us feedback on any of this so we can make this product better for you guys.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dexter. And so basically, the initial PR for this will land early next week. That should have pretty much everything John demoed and the things that Dexter talked about. Right after that PR, we're going to add support for aggregations and move usage stats to that model. Awesome. Now we move over to a much more visual presentation. Melinda, who's been spending the summer at New York Times, is going to talk to us about what she's been up to.
Hi, and you're going to show the slides, right, Shirshanka? Okay.
Yes.
So first, I just want to thank you for having me here, and thank you to the DataHub team for being so supportive as the New York Times begins to integrate DataHub. So yeah, I'm a new grad engineer on the data governance engineering team, and today I'll be talking about a small but hopefully impactful component that we're going to be adding to DataHub, which is a user experience and satisfaction survey. So before diving into the survey content, I just wanted to go over what the New York Times is using DataHub for. So the New York Times data governance engineering team is using DataHub as part of a larger data strategy to improve our data discoverability and maturity. Just as I imagine most of the people here are using DataHub, the New York Times is using DataHub to have a centralized space for consolidating data, understanding how data is used, and discovering data. As the New York Times data ecosystem becomes more complex, having a data catalog is becoming increasingly more important, which leads me to the next slide. So why is having a user survey important? We don't want to be investing precious time, resources, and money into the wrong things. And we don't want to be creating for the void. So getting user feedback can help give insight into any bugs, any confusing parts of the tool, and is also an opportunity to get ideas for future features. This way, there's more communication between developers and the intended users of DataHub. So some general ideas of the kind of information I was thinking we could be gathering is knowing if the users are able to find what they're looking for, because after all, that is the point of a data catalog. Knowing if the users ran into any problems, and depending on the problem, this could be extremely valuable information. Knowing if the users had a positive or negative experience. And we want this answer to be nuanced ideally, but getting their general impression is also very helpful. So next slide, yeah. So we were brainstorming some questions when we were initially thinking about this user survey. So some of these questions are, when should the survey pop up, if at all? We talked about maybe using a random function to decide when it would pop up, using cookies to be strategic about when the survey would pop up. Maybe it would happen after certain actions or after a certain amount of visits for each user. And ultimately, we kept the implementation for MVP pretty simple by just having a persistent tab that's always available. So that way users can always take the survey whenever they want. We also have some, sorry about that. No worries. So we also have some related questions like, how can we make questions configurable? And if we do make questions configurable. Should the survey questions be kept in a table or in a configuration file like YAML or JSON? We considered keeping the questions in a table, but thought it would be pretty complicated for developers if they want to have those questions appear on the front end. We ended up going with, or we will implement having a configuration file. So that way, like each company can decide for themselves which questions they want to use and just plug those in. We'll have a constraint on that, yeah, in this upcoming slide. So here's a sneak peek into what the front end of the survey looks like. So on the left side, you can see some specific questions, but I just want to point out that these specific questions belong to like a broader category of question types. So for example, there's an emoji rating question to describe how a person's feeling. In this case, we're asking, how's your experience so far with DataHub? But we could also switch this out with, how are you feeling about this feature on DataHub? Another type of question is a yes, no type of question, where right in this instance, we're asking if users were able to find what they were looking for, but you could switch it out for another yes, no question. And lastly, we have a free text response question, where right now we're just asking broadly for people to leave whatever feedback they have. So this could be a spot for people to report any bugs they found, give suggestions for future features, or leave whatever specific comments they want.
This is very nice. One thing I just thought of as I was listening to this was probably polls would be also very interesting to do using this, right? Where with like multi-choice answers or something, and then you get back like a result.
Yeah, that would be cool. Like, so users can see like what percentage of people voted this. Or,
right.
These are just some screenshots to show more in detail what the questions look like, the UI. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is the first and versus the final draft of the database diagram that was made. So the first draft was so complicated because originally I was thinking that we might want to have different kinds of surveys saved. So those would be saved in a surveys table. And to have that, we would also need a questions table and a responses table, and then other tables to show the relationships between the questions and responses and the surveys. That was getting too complicated. So we, like Martha was very kind and suggested saving the questions in a configuration file instead. So we were able to simplify it into just having a survey responses table with the response text, question text, user ID. Yeah, the only dilemma that we foresee is maybe when later down the line is when we want to maybe show these responses in the analytics section of the website. It might be a little difficult because say right now, objects are grouped together, or like if we want to analyze objects, we want to like select all the responses that pertain to a certain question text. Say for example, what if there's like two different questions which are essentially asking the same thing? So say for example, how's your experience so far with DataHub versus how are you liking DataHub? Even though these questions are essentially asking the same thing, if we're grouping responses according to the question text, the responses wouldn't be grouped together since the wording varies. So some not so fleshed out ideas would be maybe adding a question type column or using NLP in some way to group together survey response objects that answer the similar questions. And just a high level overview of all the parts that are going to be added for this feature. Big thank you to John for drawing me a diagram last week, which helped me create this. Some of this is still under construction specifically in the back end, but just to give a quick run through of this diagram, at the top is the survey component with some question components inside. So those would be like the emoji question, free text response, yes, no. Once the user enters and submits their responses, the survey response object PDL is used to make sure that all the things that we expect are actually there. So the response text, the question text, this information is then sent to the create endpoint. Sorry, Shirshanka? Oh, never mind. Okay. it's sent to the create endpoint where an e-bean object is then used to communicate to the table that we want to add a new survey response object. The get all endpoint would be useful for eventually when we want to have something show up in the analytics page, maybe we can use that get all endpoint. And then for the future, so like I said, this is still under development, but in the future, you'll be able to use this survey feature by just plugging in the questions that you want in the configuration file that we'll have, and some ways to contribute, since right now we're focusing on MVP. Once it's out, maybe adding cookies to be strategic about when the survey pops up and what questions are asked, or maybe figuring out how to analyze the survey responses to show in the analytics section, since I know that's something that the DataHub team was thinking about. But that is it for today. Thanks for listening to me and checking out this feature.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Melinda, for all of the great work, and really looking forward to seeing this feature show up in the product soon.
Me too.
If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her and give her feedback. She's always looking to improve the thinking behind it. All right, let's move on to our final big talk today, which is announcing integration with AWS SageMaker for models and features. And we have some familiar faces and one new face, Kevin, who's going to be talking about what he's done. But to start out with is Dexter.
Awesome. All right. I don't know. I've told some of you guys, but I've been an ML engineer in my previous lives for the last 5 years. So I've been working on recommendations and search ranking. And while doing so, I had this craving for a certain product to help me build ML models and succeed in my journey. So why is that? I felt that training, deploying, maintaining model is very hard. And the reason why it's hard, not just because it needs thinking or it needs creative thinking or something like that. It was a lot of logistics. So there's a lot of information that defines a model, like features, hyperparameters, metrics, and so on. But a lot of times when we train, we do this ad hoc process. We have a Python notebook, then we train with a bunch of different parameters, and you have to try multiple combinations to find the model that actually works out at the end. And even after deploying that model, it requires continuous training and testing. So you need to test whether it's working online. If it's not working, you have to iterate, try out another configuration and send it out. And for me, oftentimes it was really hard to keep track of all of these configurations that go on. And the name configuration implies this is a metadata. And what's good for collecting metadata? Of course, DataHub. So by collecting these metadata on DataHub, we would help the process of maintaining models and training. But that's not all. So let's move on to the next slide. A model is not just a model itself, but often a product of a long chain of data collection, starting all the way from front-end logs, going through multiple processing to create fact tables, creating training data, creating testing data, and then doing the actual training itself. And oftentimes ML practitioners are only given a myopic view of the system, where you just have data sets that already exist. Something like, for me, it was something called fact searches, which was like a list of all the searches that happened in a clean way. And we create some training data and testing data from it, and then train the model. So just that part of the system we know. But there are oftentimes changes in the upstream that can cause very unexpected effects on the quality of the training data sets, which oftentimes also causes very unexpected model behavior. I had one case where for a month, we lost millions of dollars at Airbnb just because there was an issue with one of the features that we didn't expect was there. And it took us 2 months to figure that out. Another issue, there was an Android bug where some of the logging in Android was not working. Page view was not getting logged correctly. And that caused our Android efficiency to go down, efficacy of the model to go down. And that also took more than a month to figure out. DataHub we want DataHub to provide this end-to-end lineage where you can actually see where all the parts of the training data that you use to train the model, as well as the data you use to do inference in real time, where it comes from the very beginning. And so by providing this end-to-end lineage, we save all this logistical time of these ML practitioners like trying to figure out what's wrong with the system. So I'm gonna give it up to Kevin for details on how we do this.
Hey everybody, nice to meet you all. So like Dexter was saying, one thing that we really want for the ML ecosystem is to have this end-to-end lineage from data to jobs to models and eventual deployments of those. So we decided to start off with AWS SageMaker, which is Amazon's like managed ML operations platform. And the main reasons for this were that we had already built some integrations with AWS things such as Glue and Redshift. So we had some nice experience with their APIs. And on top of that, SageMaker is a pretty well fleshed out platform that really has some deep lineage tracking abilities. And it's already well used by some of the people that we've been talking to. So we thought it'd be a nice start for us to jump into the ML space. As for the main components of SageMaker, the ones that we focused on were first a feature store. So features are basically like the entities that you would feed into an ML model that it's actually making its predictions on. And SageMaker has a feature store that lets you connect to say like an S3 bucket or their built-in streams, which lets you serve data both for training your model and also for running inference online. On top of that, SageMaker also has this concept of a job, which is quite similar to other workflow orchestrators. And they have a pretty broad definition. There's like 8 to 9 different types of jobs, which we all decided to support, but you have different jobs for, say, training a model, for tuning the parameters that your model is using, for also just doing basic things like data processing and cleaning as well. And with jobs, you also have some pretty interesting lineage features, such as, for instance, one job can spawn another job, which the canonical example is if you launch a hyperparameter tuning job, that's going to spawn a bunch of training jobs to test out each of those hyperparameters that you're using. And finally, we have this concept of an ML model, which is the result of running a training job. So if you train a model, well, SageMaker has a model registry that will allow you to register that model and let everybody in your team see the models that you're using. And on top of that, they have an abstraction layer in that you can package a model and later group them together for versioning as well. And after you've got a model that you think can be productionized, you can deploy it via something called an endpoint. So we had a couple of bottling discussions for how we want to represent these features in DataHub. And for feature stores, we decided to create this thing called an ML feature table, which is a group of ML features which had already been added to DataHub. But we also noticed that SageMaker, as well as this other feature store that we've added support for called Feast, has this concept of a primary key, which is this, you can think of it as a column in your feature store that's acting as like unique identifier for each of your samples. So we added that as well. And the idea is that each feature in primary key stores a pointer to the source data set, such as an S3 bucket or BigQuery table, which can be both the offline store as well as the online store. And the feature table is going to be an additional layer for grouping together your features and primary keys. On top of that, we extended the existing ML model config in that we had to link ML models to their training jobs, as is done in SageMaker. And we also added this concept of an ML model group in line with what SageMaker has, as well as an ML model deployment, which models SageMaker's model endpoints. And yeah, on top of that, we also added new concepts for ML hyperparams for hyperparameters, as well as metrics, which we separated into training and online ones. So yeah, as for what it looks like, a feature table is pretty similar in terms of UI to a data set. So you just have a list of all of the features, the types, and also whether or not they're a primary key. We also have a nice sources tab that indicates, say like the S3 buckets or Kafka streams that have been linked to your feature table. And on the lineage view, you can see a representation of that as well. And if you're using your features in any models, that would also be shown in the lineage view. And for models, we made another screen showing, for now, just training metrics and the hyperparameters, since SageMaker, at least, does not give us any online metrics. But we also have tabs for seeing which groups a model belongs to, other custom properties of a model. And on a lineage view, you can see the flow from, say, the data set that the model is reading from, the training job that produces the model, and any groups or endpoints that the model is making or a part of. So yeah, the SageMaker recipe is pretty similar to our existing ones in terms of like your credentials, like your AWS region, your keys is the same as say Glue or Redshift. But we have a couple of additional configs for controlling granular access to if you want to ingest your feature groups, your models, or your jobs. And for jobs, there's additional ones that you can see in this link for specific jobs that you want to, specific types of jobs that you want to ingest. So yep, as for what's been done, just a quick summary. So we ingest jobs, features, and models, as well as all of the lineage that SageMaker gives us on that end. And besides that, we have also added a connector for Feast, which is another type of feature store. What's coming next is we've been really looking into lineage between features and model/jobs, which would complete our lineage graph, so to speak. We've been talking with the SageMaker team at the AWS, but it seems that they don't have their own native support for that, but it's planned for later this year. So we'll be on that as soon as it comes out. And besides that, we're also just very open to integrating more ML platforms now that we have these models in DataHub. So if anyone has suggestions, feel free to message us on Slack or just ping us.
So that's great. And I see that some people are already letting us know what platforms they're using in their stack. And I think there was a PR on MLflow that came in a little bit earlier. So maybe now is a good time to kind of get back to it and refresh that and merge it in, right, Kevin?
Yep.
Cool. So this is basically it for the talk, correct? Awesome. Let us know as this release gets cut. If you're using SageMaker, try it out and let us know how it works for you. We'll of course have our own demo pipeline that will be up on the demo website. So you'll be able to kind of look at what it looks like when a real team runs a machine learning model and trains it. Are we doing a live demo for this? I guess not, right? We just had the screenshots, correct? Perfect.
We can do a live demo. I know that we're running low on time.
Yeah, we are running low on time. So let's skip that. We'll just put it up on the demo, DataHub project.io, and then we'll let you know on Slack so you can go try it out. All right. So quick peek into the future. I don't know if everyone knows, but we have published a roadmap. And so this is what the roadmap looks like for this quarter. We just discussed data set profiling and data previews today. We're starting to work on data quality. There's already a lot of feedback on the RBAC, or the fine-grained access control for metadata, RFC. We're continuing to work through the feedback and starting to implement it. Would love some help on SQL parsing. Column level lineage is something we want to get to. So if someone has SQL parsing, creds and would love to work with us on that, would love to collaborate on that one. And then also building out integration with operational metadata. Now that we have support for time series, data is going to be much easier. So we're looking forward to building out that stack for the next 3 months. In addition, there's also other things that are happening that we didn't really put on the roadmap per se. So there's going to be continued advancements in the no-code capabilities, including better ways of serializing these events and integrating with the platform. Integrations are something we generally don't put on the roadmap because we actually just try to be agile and react to what the community wants and facilitate collaborations or just do some of them ourselves. So just a quick announcement, integrations with Redash and Metabase are actually starting out. There are folks in the community that are already working with it. Message me if you want to collaborate on these integrations or want to start a new one. We're also starting to go back and kind of do a fit and finish run on top of the product. We've built quite a lot of features, and there's a few areas where we want to go back and kind of make sure that all the user flows work beautifully. So you'll see some of that kind of fit and finish work happening over the next month or two. And that's pretty much it. So stay in touch, and we'll see you in the usual fourth Friday of the next month. And if there are most of the questions that I saw coming in over the sign-up sheet were all about data observability. So hopefully this answers all of your questions around what we're doing and where we're going. But if you have other questions, let's take it on Slack. And if there are any burning ones, bring them up right now. Cool. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you in a few weeks.